Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about why you shouldn't live in fear / the biggest regret that people have at the end of their life. Based on the research, and yes, we got a hearth going today. I got the cats right here next to me. Let me show you. They're loving it, obviously. It's Canoli's first hearth and Chianti's first of the season. So do whatever you gotta do to get cozy, get a cup of tea, light a candle, and let's get straight into it. Just as a reminder, also, if you're looking for a mental health journal, check out A Season of Life, my journaling workbook in the description box. Before we get into anything else, I want you to pause this video for a moment and think for a moment on your last day on this earth. Think about what you might be feeling. Let's say you're 85 years old, your breath is getting shallow, you recognize that time is slipping in between your fingertips. Everything is almost all in the past. There is very little still in your future, and the present is quickly fleeting. When you get to that point, what would you regret? Where does your mind immediately go? What are those things that you would most regret on your last day of life, thinking back on your entire life? Try to think about 1 to 5 regrets if you can. I know for me, I have 3 that I really care for, and then another 2 that I could kind of muster up, but there are 3 things that I would really regret. After you've done that, chances are the regrets that you named are things that you didn't get a chance to do rather than actions you did take that didn't turn out well. And this is because studies show people tend to regret inaction way more than action. Risks that they didn't take versus risks that they did take that didn't turn out so well. We also know from people who work in hospice that a lot of people at the end of their lives regret things that, again, they didn't do, risks they didn't take, as opposed to risks they did take. There's actually a famous book on this from someone who used to work in hospice and listed the 5 top regrets that people have. I was going to mention the 5 things from her book, but I looked at her page and apparently you're not allowed to cite more than 1 of the regrets people have at the end of their life because you have to pay her to mention the 5 things, even though they're literally big picture things and it's fair use and you cannot limit people's free speech. But I guess she doesn't want people spreading word about things unless she's getting paid, so I'm just gonna not touch that and talk about the research instead. So there's one study from 2018 that's really interesting on this topic. It explores why we tend to regret things we didn't do, regrets of inaction more than regrets of action. The study talks about how there are 3 types of selves that we all have. There's our actual self, how we all are, objectively speaking, how other people experience us in a lot of ways. There's the ideal self, which is how we aspire to be, our values, the things we wish to accomplish, things that seem to come more from inside us than anywhere else. And there's the ought self, which is how other people want us to be. Let's say, for instance, that your ideal self is an artist. Your ought self is someone with a stable job, and then your actual self is someone with a stable job who's trying to do art on the side. We as people tend to find ways to cope with deficits in our ought selves. So, if your parents really wanted you to be a doctor and you were not a doctor, yeah, it might feel disappointing to them. You might feel like, oh, it would be great if my parents could be proud of me, but you're not going to have that many regrets about it because it's not what you want for yourself, it's what other people want for you. Versus something like an ideal self regret, like my parents wanted me to become a doctor, so I did become a doctor, so I never got a chance to pursue my artist career. Yeah, that actually might give a lot of regrets at the end of your life. People find it easier to find a silver lining in risks that they took that didn't work out than they do in risks they didn't take. Because let's say you start a business, it doesn't work out, the business fails within the first year. You still learned things, maybe you networked, maybe for the next time you open a business it works out better. If you're able to focus on the things that came from that, and often there are things that come from even failures. Actually, not often, I would argue all the time. There are things that we gain from failures. There are gains within our failures, there are failures within our gains. When we're able to see that realistically, we don't have as many regrets about it because we recognize, yeah, the business failed, but I gained this, this, and this. Whereas with a risk that you didn't take, a regret of inaction, You don't know what doors could have opened. Even if you had failed at that thing you wanted to do, it could have opened something completely new for you that you will just never know. When people don't live up to their ideal self, they tend to experience lower emotions, things like dejection, grief, sadness, disappointment, emptiness. But when they don't live up to their ought selves, they tend to experience more agitated emotions like anxiety, guilt, or restlessness. When you think about not living up to someone else's expectations for you, it's an agitated type of feeling. Whereas when you think about not living up to your own expectations for yourself, it's more of a low feeling. It's painful, but in a different way. So it makes sense that the risks we do take, they might be accompanied by short-term agitated emotions, but the risks that we don't take will be accompanied by long-term grief. We talk a lot about grief in the context of someone passing away, or maybe a breakup, losing someone in our lives. But how often do we stop to think about the grief we feel about who we could have been? A lot of the times when people are at the end of their lives, they feel that grief towards themselves, of the possibilities that could have been, the doors that could have opened, the ideal self that they could have gone after. So the most enduring regrets are those discrepancies between the actual self and the ideal self, not so much discrepancies between the actual self and the ought self. Why is this? The research study proposes a couple of different reasons. One is that ideal selves could be more unrealistic. If your ideal self is a Nobel Prize winner, that's a little bit more unrealistic than what is expected of you as your ought self, like just support your family. Ideal selves also get at our core values. They help us think about, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want my life to be? What do I want for myself rather than what do others want for me? And that is very powerful because values alignment is everything in life. Our core values are not necessarily what's been thrust upon us. A lot of people, they internalize values from their family, from their elders, from what others expect of them. But a lot of those values they end up rejecting. If your family really values stability, you might like stability, but you might find that actually it matters to you far less than creativity, let's say. And a third reason why we tend to regret ideal self discrepancies more is that our ought selves depend a lot on culture and subculture, whereas our ideal selves, they seem to come from a more stable place that isn't so much dependent on who is in our social group. So what can we learn from this type of research? What are the takeaways? Taking risks that get you closer to your ideal self could bring short-term agitation. It could make you anxious or guilty or fearful that you're not living up to others' expectations for you. But there's a very good chance you'd be able to cope with those painful emotions. You would be able to overcome them, to look at what came from something, even if it didn't go the way that you expected it to. And in fact, people who are able to find the silver lining, even in negative things that happen to them, even in failures, they tend to be more resilient and they tend to have better emotional and even physical outcomes. On the other hand, it's very likely that your regrets at the end of your life are going to be regrets of inaction, things that you didn't do, risks you didn't take because you lived in fear. Those are the things that would get at your core values, that would give your life the most meaning. So when you think about it, if at the end of your life you haven't done those things, of course you would feel grief. Of course you would feel like, I shouldn't have lived in fear like I did. If you didn't really live your life according to your ideal self, according to your values, who did you really live it for? So in the context of fear, if there's something you're considering doing that you're not sure if you want to take a risk on because it seems too scary, think about how you might feel when you're 85 years old if you didn't do this thing. I am not one to tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your life. That is completely your decision. But it might be helpful to start thinking about how that could look for you. If you were to do this thing that you think you would really strongly regret not doing, what would be a smart, calculated, strategic way to do that in a way that limits possible negative consequences but still opens you up to possibilities you don't even know are there? For example, I have a novel coming out very soon. I don't know exactly when I'm going to post this video, but it's probably going to be like a couple weeks after that. And I'm really scared about this because there's nothing in this life that I want more than to be a published novelist. It's a very big risk for me, and I worry, what if it's not that good? What if it's not going to be received well? What if people don't like it? But I know that if I don't take that risk, I'm going to regret it my whole life. I could have had a life where I made my dreams come true, but if I never take that initial step, then it's not going to happen. Yeah, maybe this novel will be a massive failure, but even if that's the case, I'll learn from it and I'll do better on the next one. If you don't take that initial risk, you cannot learn and grow from it in the way that you need to. You can't ever get better. Like they say, very successful people are not people that constantly have successes. They're people that constantly have failures and learn from them. Every person that has a YouTube channel, for instance, they will tell you if they go back and rewatch their initial videos, it is the most cringe-worthy experience in the world. It is so painful to sit through because everyone, when they start out with the YouTube channel, is so much worse, so much more awkward. They can't speak well, they can't edit well. The quality is just not up to par, but it's through those constant failures that we get better at it. And it's like that with anything in life. You have to initially take that risk, put yourself out there, do something really scary to finally get better at it and meet your goal. Remember, you can cope with short-term agitated emotions, but it might be really difficult to sit with long-term grief if you live in fear and you don't do the things that you actually want to do in life. Thanks for watching. See you soon.